Good afternoon and welcome to NTV Uganda. My name is Malaki Vilaodera. Now, UN Women has developed rapid and targeted responses to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on vulnerable women and girls and to ensure that the long-term recovery benefits them. As part of the broader UN-wide response, of course, UN Women Uganda partners are actually complementing government of the COVID-19 response efforts, raising awareness on prevention of COVID-19 infections, supporting coping strategies in the face of lost economic livelihoods, mobilizing and organizing women and girls to participate on national and district COVID-19 task forces, including many other interventions. However, more has to be done. And so identifying the gaps and bridging them effectively is our sole mission this afternoon. So in our conversation today, we seek to, number one, highlight the social economic impact of COVID-19 on vulnerable women and girls in Uganda. 2, to recognize the various interventions, efforts by the women's movement in Uganda in responding and to mitigating the risks and impact of COVID-19. Finally, and number 3, to share with government, development partners and other actors gender-responsive and vulnerability-centered policies and programmatic strategies for the mitigating the impact or the mitigation of the impact of COVID-19 during, at recovery and in the development phase of Ugandan society. So to achieve this, we invite you to join in the conversation this afternoon via our social media platforms under the hashtag Women Against COVID-19. Of course, later on we shall share and open our call lines for you to directly interact with us right here in studios. You can also make sure that you're active. We are live on social media. Beg your pardon, that's on NTV Uganda across all the social media platforms. Welcome to this conversation. I'll directly go into of course, inviting and welcoming our panelists for the afternoon, this afternoon for this conversation. I will begin with our invisible panelist, Ms. Nambalirwa Maureen, who will be helping us with the interpretation this afternoon. Also to my right, I do have one beautiful Daphne Namukuza. She is a programs manager at UNIPA. UNIPA is the Ugandan network of young people living with HIV and AIDS. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right. I also do have Ms. Susan Achiro. She is a social worker at the National Union of Women with Disabilities right here in the country. Welcome, Susan. All right. Thank you so much, Susan. I also do have onto my farthest end, Ms. Lillian Moreko. She is the ED, that's the Executive Director of International Community of Women Living with HIV in Eastern Africa. Many thanks. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, viewers and listeners.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to you too. Just to point out, we also will be joined by about 3 panelists as well on the virtual platform. That's Zoom. Of course, they'll be trying to link up with us as we continue with the conversation. I'll be joined by Ms. Betty Ochana, the National Union of Women with Disabilities in Uganda representative. I also will be joined by Ms. Esther Namboka, the founder and executive director, Girls Forum International. Later on, I'll also be joined by Ms. Miriam Cheikut. She will be joining us. She is the programs manager, National Association, beg your pardon, of women organizations right here in Uganda. So keep the conversations going. Already we've shared our posters on social media. Let us in on what you think with regards to the COVID-19 responses that have been put in place and the impact that this kind of pandemic slowly turning into an epidemic, according to experts, is doing to our vulnerable women and girls across different societies, communities, across different countries. Many thanks, and let's start this conversation. And I think I will start with Ms. Lillian. Just take 2 minutes to explain to us what your role is as an institution, of course, with the wider scope I perceive in this panel, with your scope being in Eastern Africa. Let us in on what exactly it is that you do for the sake of the women and girls in society?
Thank you very much. The International Community of Women Living with HIV in Eastern Africa is an advocacy network for and by women living with HIV in all our diversity. And that means women who are living in rural, urban, women living with disability, women sex workers, young people, adolescent girls, and you can go on and on. And as an organization, we advocate to ensure that women living with HIV have access to sexual reproductive health and rights services that are comprehensive in nature, that they have access to prevention, care, treatment, and support services, and importantly, that they are meaningfully represented or sitting at platforms where policies and decisions that impact on their lives are being made.
Right.
So we give a voice to women living with HIV. We make sure that the services that are available, that are provided, are informed by the women living with HIV themselves.
Okay.
So it is from that aspect that when we talk about comprehensiveness, and we are looking at everything, that now we get into dealing with COVID-19
Right.
as an issue.
Okay. Before I get to Ms. Susan Achiro, maybe you can let us in on where is your footprint here in Uganda, so to speak?
So we are working in 5 countries in the region: Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, but our secretariat is based here. And for that matter, because we are based here, we really get into the nitty-gritty of what is happening here. We do a lot of work in Uganda, but we are also looking at the regional issues, and we look to advocate to make sure that we are giving a regional perspective and approach, especially when we are dealing with health issues, when we are dealing with pandemics like HIV, Ebola, COVID-19.
Right.
That we are looking at, if you talk about a community, you're not only talking about one country, but you're talking about countries that are relating on a daily basis. You're talking about communities that are closer to each other and sharing a lot. And in this case, for example, we are sharing borders, and we are sharing a lot from an economic point of view. And therefore, we look at how do we push our governments, how do we push the East African community to make sure that they come up with a response that addresses populations and citizens across the 5 and other countries, rather than focusing on an individual country.
All right. I think later on we'll be getting into the collaboration. Of course, from a political perspective, there's been hitches here and there, but we'll be getting into that later on. All right. Ms. Susan Achiro, feel free to let us in on what exactly your institution does. You are a social worker at the National Union of Women with Disabilities in Uganda. We all call it NUWODU. Feel free to take 2 minutes to break it down for us.
Thank you so much. I'm a social worker, and I work with National Union of Women with Disabilities, commonly known as NUWODU. We are an umbrella organization that brings together all women with disabilities, the blind, the deaf, those with epilepsy, those with physical disabilities, the little persons. So we work in 69 districts here in Uganda. And we focus on how to improve on the livelihood of those women. We also work in the area of gender. We also work in the area of education. We want to see the life of women with disabilities being improved, and we want to make sure that we advocate for their rights, because we are a voice for those women. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan. Of course, we'll be breaking down what exactly the nitty-gritties on how you're helping women living with disabilities pretty much be able to earn a living, especially in this challenging COVID-19 times. All right. Let me go over to you, Miss Olga. Break it down for us. UNIPA. And that's why, the young people, but young people living with HIV and AIDS. Let us in on what UNIPA does, and of course we'll be breaking down your activities during these times to ensure that young people living with HIV and AIDS are also not forgotten.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you really literally started me off. Young people living with HIV cannot be forgotten, and that is what is UNIPA's biggest mandate. So UNIPA is just an acronym for the Uganda Network of Young People Living with HIV, and we are a youth-led and youth-serving organization that is focusing on building the capacity of young people living with HIV to be at the forefront of the national and international response to HIV. We have realized as an organization that, as my colleague was mentioning, that if you are to actually handle the problem, you have to start with the people who are experiencing the problem. That is why for us as a network, we put young people living with HIV at the forefront of interventions and programs that are targeting them. So we build their capacity, we bring them in, we empower them, we share life skills education, we share different kinds of skills education with them, and then we build them to be advocates. So we build district-based movements, and currently we are working in 54 districts in Uganda, and we're working on building district-based movements of young people living with HIV that can support communities to not only break stigma and discrimination, but also support people to go out there and test, get to know their status, actually living a life that you're aware of, you're able to plan for. So for us as a network, we come together to not only mobilize, but to also create platforms. We have created different activities. We have a famous campaign that is called the Y+ Beauty Pageant. And this is a campaign, a beauty pageant that is designed for strictly young people living with HIV to come out there and show the world that HIV does not define me. I am a leader, I am a humanitarian. In whichever way they identify as, HIV is just part of them. So yes, basically what the network does is to really give the voice to the young people and amplify it to ensure that it reaches the last mile to the last person with whom we are communicating to.
Right, right. Yeah. I think now that I'm on you, maybe we can take it on to the next phase. How has this times, COVID-19 times, of course we were on lockdown. Yeah. So how are you able to still dispense your services amidst the lockdown?
Yeah. Well, it has been very challenging because the work that we do, as I mentioned, is done through the district-based foot soldiers who are working in the district. Right. So because of the lockdown, many of the young people were not able to access their medication. For us as a network, what we have done is we have supported other young people living with HIV to act as peer brokers. So they are able to deliver the medicine to their peers. We are also liaising with the health facilities where we have, as I mentioned, we have district-based movements. So the district-based movement has a connection with every health facility that provides art within the district. So we are liaising with those different health facilities to ask them, well, this is the list of people, have they all received their medication? Is there a challenge? Where does this person stay? And then we are coming in as an organization to offer the peer brokers to go in and then start delivering the medication. Then of course it's not only about the medication. We have also come to appreciate that a lot of the young people living with HIV, their adherence is hinged on the peer-to-peer support, on going to the groups where they continuously encourage each other, they share similar but different challenges, and they're able to not only hold themselves together, but also advise themselves on different life matters. Now with the lockdown and the banning of public gatherings, it means that this social system is taken away from them, and many of them are now at risk of mental health challenges. So we are coming in again with an aspect of the of peer counselors who can call their peers. We have also developed a mobile application, and this is called the SRHR app. So it basically like a mobile application that someone can download, and they can just, take their time while also learning a few things here and there. And for us as an organization, we're able to assess and say, well, player number one is lacking information here, so this is how you support them to get this information. Then, of course, the biggest has been lobbying. Lobbying with different partners to ensure that our peers not only have access to medication, but they also have access to food. We have one of the peers that we lost in Bale who died because they were, of course, amongst other reasons, but they were unable to get their food, so they were unable to take their medication, and in the end, they just lost their lives. So we are also trying to lobby with the districts and the different community structures to ensure that these people have the services and the information and the different supplies that they need to not affect their quality of life, or to ensure that it's even much more bigger and better now.
Right.
Yeah.
Susan, I think I'll take it on to you. During these times, with regards to you dispensing your services to the vulnerable women in our societies, especially them living with disability, how have you been able to still serve them amid the lockdown? Thank God now there's an ease of the same, but how are you able to still cater to them during that lockdown period, especially now in COVID-19?
Thank you very much. we have been really trying. However, it has not been easy. It has really been very hard, and there are very many challenges. However, we do work with our district associations. We have the district leaders in all the districts where we work from. We also work with community development officers. We also have councillors that represent persons with disabilities. Those people have really helped us to extend our services. In case there is any problem, they usually give us calls and we refer them. However, we have been using calls. Then we have tried to change some materials into local languages, especially on the issue of sensitizing them on COVID-19. And this has really helped them to get the information. So during this sensitization, I think they are benefiting. However, there are very many challenges taking place down there in the villages. We have issues of women with mental health. They have really failed to get access to their medication just because of the transport issues. However, we have tried to work with the district leaders, the DHOs. We have worked with them, and then the health centers, and they have tried to deliver their medication in their homes. That is how we are. That is what we have been doing.
Right.
However, we cannot meet everyone. We could not reach to everyone, but we have tried. Sometimes we have used our sign language interpreters to help in those districts. So briefly, that is how we have managed to reach our beneficiaries.
Right.
We have also come up with radio talk shows to sensitize them, especially for those who can hear. And the only challenge we have got is that group of persons with hearing impairment. They don't hear. There are no sign language interpreters that side. So that has been a challenge, and they have really been left out. For example, when it comes to materials that are being given out, they are not accessible. For example, we are seeing adverts running on televisions. The deaf people, for those ones who have never gone to school, they can't even read what is being shown. So that has been a challenge, but we are trying our best to make sure they access this information through our district structures and the district leaders.
All right.
Also at the national level, we are working with the Ministry of Gender to make sure our issues reach the national task force.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that submission. I think we'll get back to you, especially on the challenges that you've spelled out and what the solution could be in terms of when you sit down as leaders in this particular, kind of entity. What do you look at as solutions, and who do you think you can bring on board or approach, so to speak, to help you, overcome such challenges? Because once you're facing challenges, it means there's a woman or a girl down there who's not accessing services and is suffering. All right, let me stretch to Lillian. Eastern Africa, we are blessed with the East African community. Let me start with East Africa first. But of course, over the days and months, especially with this COVID-19, many experts came on board and have been saying that they thank somewhat. Leaders ought to thank the COVID-19 pandemic because it has just put a lens on the challenges or the lack of collaboration that the different entities have. Now, in the midst of that and with that reality, how have your services been impacted, especially now that you have a wider scope of Eastern Africa in terms of helping out women living with HIV and AIDS?
So, thank you very much. I just want to begin by saying that if there's any one thing that we've learned from COVID-19, that probably we need to reflect on and see how we make ourselves better is that COVID has been a test to our leadership. Because we have the East African community that rallies everybody in these countries together. But COVID showed us that each of our countries is working independently and they are doing their own things without coming together to come up with a program that is regional based and that addresses the regional needs and priorities of their people.
Right.
So that is very, very important, that it is times like this that we needed the East African community to rally the presidents of these respective countries to make sure that we have a regional program that is addressing everything that relates to us. But we are seeing countries, for example, Uganda, we are under lockdown. We know in Tanzania, they are freely moving.
Right.
In Kenya, there are bits and pieces of districts and regions that are locked down.
Right.
And then the question is, where did the East African community mandate go? That is one. But secondly, in terms of responding, we are seeing governments giving us guidelines and rules of the game. From our perspective, we would have expected that we are speaking as a region, we are having common agenda that we are addressing, and probably if that was the case, then we would be having fewer cases that are coming into the country as people who are having or who are testing with COVID-19. So that shows us that there is a question of leadership at the regional level that we must be addressing. Secondly, if you look at the infections, each of the countries is reporting different numbers.
Right.
And therefore, if we had a strategy that addresses the region as a whole, probably would be at the same level of flattening the curve. Thirdly, if you look at how we are treating East Africans, if we were speaking as a region, that would not be the case. And the impact that it has on the response. Because if you sit in Uganda and you start calling Tanzanians as people who are importing the virus, it has a long-term impact in terms of how we relate, how we work, and that is one of how it impacts on our work.
But let me ask you, Lillian, do you think there's an end in sight? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Because as we've been following current affairs, it looks like it's getting worse by the day in terms of the East African relationship, our leaders. For instance, just a few weeks ago, the top leaders, the presidents of the East African community, had a virtual meeting just to see, guys, this is our reality. What could be the collaborated, kind of responses to the different issues that face East Africa as a unit? But not all the presidents are represented.
Yeah, I think it can get better by the fact that even that virtual meeting with few of them happened. It should have happened at the beginning, but we are glad that it happened and it can be better. And therefore, one of the important things that we need to do is to strengthen our collaboration, our working together. We need to be the people to push them. So as civil society, our role is to push the governments that it cannot be business as usual.
Right.
It cannot be a Uganda, a Kenya, a Tanzania, a Rwanda business. It has to be a regional business because we don't have time, to wait.
Right.
But we also now have learned that we have to be better at our game because the international community is struggling with their response.
Right.
And therefore we need to work to make sure that our leaders are holding each other's hand, and that we are behind them, and that we are getting a response that serves the needs and priorities of the citizens of this region.
Okay, before I link up to Esther Namboka, who's joining us virtually, let me throw this again to you. Now that it's heated on the East African, we'd call it quote-unquote trial, so to speak. So as an institution, how have you been able to adapt to these challenges and still, dispense your services to the vulnerable women, them that are living with HIV and AIDS in this region?
So just to start by saying that it has been difficult, especially for the vulnerable groups, including women, adolescent girls, and women in their diversity, that when this came, we never expected it. especially in Uganda, when the announcement of the lockdown was done, there was no preparation. Nobody knew. We only had 2 hours to prepare. And from where we sit, especially for women living with HIV, it really hit hard to the extent that women were supposed to be getting their refills, and that is antiretroviral drugs, so that they are able to maintain the levels of the HIV. They did not have that opportunity. And that is, like as hard as it could be. But I think one important point to bring to our viewers and listeners is the fact that Uganda has had an experience of dealing with epidemics. We've had HIV and AIDS for the last 35 years.
Correct.
And we've built a system and structure right from the national up to the grassroots. And as a community of people living with HIV, we have that structure from the national level up to the last person who is the person who is living with HIV. And therefore, when all this happened and we were in that shock and hit hard, we remembered that we needed to use our structure not only to deal with HIV, but with COVID-19. And therefore, at the national level, we mobilized ourselves as networks of people living with HIV. We reached out to our district networks and to the lower levels, and we formed a coalition immediately and started responding to the immediate needs of our people. And one of the immediate needs that came was the access to antiretroviral drugs.
Correct.
Access to treatment. And that's where we started. But also amongst us, and like Olga said, we had young people, we have medical personnel, and therefore they mobilized and came on board and said, you know what, especially when we didn't have a way of traveling, but the medical people within our group were able to travel because they had the identity cards. So they hit the road running and started distributing medicines where implementing partners or people who distribute ARVs were not able to reach because of issues of stigma and discrimination,
correct,
confidentiality, disclosure. Because the implementing partners or people who give services, HIV services, thought that it was easy to get down and reach out to their clients or the people that they serve. But it was not the case because there are issues of stigma and discrimination that is still high.
Right.
And therefore it was our own people who had to hit the road and reach out to those people who are being challenged.
Right.
So we used the network that we already have, the structure that we already have in place, the structure that unfortunately the national response is not buying into. So the question that we pose and we want to really interrogate is, how can we have a structure that has been built with the resources for over 35 years and it is there existing to deal with an epidemic, and here we are being hit with another epidemic, by the one epidemic that is also hitting hard on people living with HIV because they are a group that is vulnerable, and yet we cannot use it, we cannot integrate.
Right.
But of course we did not stop there, and I think we were more privileged that before COVID-19 came, under UN Women, we had started working around a movement building.
Okay.
We had known that we cannot do this work unless you come together as women, you come together as a movement and fight together, because the issues, like for example she's talking about, they are the same issues that we are facing as women living with HIV. And therefore we said we needed to build a movement that brings us together so that we can be able to deal with issues as a collective. And therefore when COVID-19 came, it sort of found us ready,
prepared,
but also that we were able to go back and look at who can we collaborate with. Who are the other partners, the UN, the funding mechanisms in this country, the ministries, so that we jointly address the problem as we were addressing HIV.
Okay, and I think we'll come back again to you, still on the same, just to try and see what could be the problem then, if you already have pre-existing systems and structures that have been working years on years, and this side, the big people, are not willing to work together with you or adopt, you know, the same, so to speak. Of course, we'll be getting into that. Virtually, like I mentioned earlier on, I do have Miss Esther Namboka. She is the founder and executive director of Girls Forum International. Good afternoon, Miss Esther. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Brilliant.
To you all.
Thank you so much.
I think.
Thank you so much. I think with you we'll start from the onset. Just break it down for us. Tell us what Girls Forum International does, especially with this afternoon that we're specifically having a focus on vulnerable women and girls in Uganda.
Thank you so much, and I want to congratulate all of you for keeping safe up to this time. And it's an honor to join you, such great minds, to share on this platform. Girls Forum International is an NGO that fosters stable and economically empowered families with focus on empowerment of vulnerable girls and women. Girls Forum particularly is working with the women street vendors. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit us, it really hit the women vendors very, very highly. And the impact has been very much of great impact to the women. What we have done so far as Girls Forum, we have done a rapid situation assessment in about 7 markets in the outskirts of the Kampala city, and particularly in Makindye. And the assessment really gave us a very unprepared situation and lack of enough preparedness from the market authorities. There's a lot of disorganization in the markets. The markets are not safe for the women vendors to operate. And in particular, I would like to share that the government has done a lot of work in spreading out the information. But however, it has not been understood by many of the women vendors. And actually, you find that there's a lot of misinformation and myths found in these particular markets. And in particular, I want to mention that in one particular market where we visited, you would find people have put water guard tablets in water to act as sanitizers. Another one is that you'd find some of them are getting cooking oil and mixing it with the waraji, it's the local brew, to make a sanitizer. So you find that as they make this kind of products, they think they don't need soap. Another thing that we realize that there's a lot of congestion in the markets, and with lack of control of movement. You'll find that in one area, the entrance point, am I okay? Am I? Okay. Hello? Am I being heard? Hello? Okay, very sorry for that. So you find that at the same time, there's lack of control in the markets. There are different access points that are getting into the markets, much as there's one main entry where people are washing hands, people are using soap in order to access the markets. You find in some markets, the entry points are different. So you find that some have washed their hands, but because somebody else has used another access points to enter the market, therefore they have not washed their hands. And the other point is that you find that there is no compliance with the guidelines. And then there is nobody to make sure that there is adherence and compliance. Am I being heard?
Yes, Esther, we can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So you'll find that there is a lack of coordination in the movements in the markets. There is congestion in the markets. But most painfully, you'd realize that the government, much as has appreciated women vendors as essential and as frontliners, but they have not been supported enough. I realized that the health officers have been supported with PPEs, the personal protective equipment. They have received enough and adequate information and as well as the skills. But the women vendors who are serving the country with safe and fresh food, they are lacking this protective equipment.
Okay.
So they are working under high risk of contracting the virus. At the same time, we also look at the sleeping facilities or accommodations. These women have virtually left their homes to come and sleep in the markets. But if you look at their conditions, it's really very disheartening. Many of them are lacking beddings. The weather has been a bit cold lately, therefore the weather is really so bad. And then sexual harassment. You see, even during the day, these women are facing sexual harassment from their customers,
right,
from market authorities, from their fellow vendors. But it got worse when the women were told to sleep outside their homes. So therefore, they are sleeping in a situation whereby actually it escalates sexual harassment to them. Number two, these women have abandoned their families, they abandoned their children back home. Who is taking care of their children? Assuming if at all they are even girl child, whereby the chances of getting sexually harassed could even be high. So you realize that as Girls Forum, when we made that assessment, as everybody has already shared, that really we have limited support or control because of the movement. All we did was to engage the leaders on phone and other avenues to make sure that as leaders they come in, one, to make sure the markets are safe for the women, both day and night, and especially in the nights. And then secondly, to also make sure that at least there's a redesign or redesign of the layouts of the markets to make sure there's social distancing within the different stalls of the women. And also we made sure that we talk to the women to make sure that they engage in the planning, decisions, and responses towards COVID-19 in the markets. We do not want women to be left out, especially the women vendors, to be left outside. They are on the planning of the markets. Whatever response that the government is coming or the market authorities that come up with, we need the women at the forefront. And we have made sure that we talk to some of those women to make sure that they participate in some of these decisions. However, I want to appreciate that we need the government to come up with guidelines that are customized to market operations. The guideline that as I get as Esther, who is at home with children, with less crowding, it should be quite different from the market operations. We want to hear guidelines like, please, as customers, as you come in, do not give cash to the women vendors. Make sure that you use mobile money. That is a safety precaution. We want to hear guidelines like, please, within every, from one stall to another, there is some distance. So we want the government to come up, make sure that the guidelines are customized to the market operations. Number two, to make sure that the operations are clearly understood in lay language, simple language, in local languages to the market women. So so far at the moment, there's not. We can say that because of the movement challenge, we have what we have managed to do is to make sure that we communicate on phone. The few times we have visited the markets by our staff who are nearby the different markets to make sure you do that sensitization, and also to make sure that the women come up and participate in the key decisions that are targeting COVID-19 response.
Esther, thank you so much, Esther. Before I let you go, I believe that you still can hear me. do you believe that if the women had some sort of groups and representatives, so to speak, do you believe that that would have made your interventions easier, so to speak?
Thank you so much. Yes, I would like to say that it's one of the strategies that we are planning to have is to make sure there is formation of groups and to make sure the existing groups are strengthened to be able to come up and form a movement, to be able to speak. Most times when women are working as individuals, they cannot be listened to. But if at all they come up and they join voices, they join the strength and they have the zeal, they will be listened to very easily, and especially by the market authorities, whereby many of them are men. Much as we are saying that 66% of the women are owning up business in the informal sector, you find that the leadership in most of all these markets are male-dominated. So therefore, we have to make deliberate efforts to make sure that women form groups that can be able to amplify their voices, to make sure that their visibility is actually seen. And I think this is a weakness that has been there, and it's something that we need to embark on. And I'm sure that when these groups also come up, we can use them also for savings. And now, at the moment, one of the greatest challenges is the lack of capital. The women have lost a lot of capital. They have lost a lot of livelihoods. And we are thinking that one way to recover, to come up and mobilize some funds, is to make sure that these women are formed up in cooperative groups. And hopefully, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives can come up to support with small startups for these women.
Question, and on this one, I'll just give you a few seconds to respond to. What's the reality on ground? You mentioned that you had to move fast and furious to do a quick survey on the situation of the street vendors, who most of us interact with on a day-to-day basis, especially on rush hours, so to speak. After COVID-19, with the lockdown and, of course, zero traffic on the streets, where did these women go to, especially them that didn't have market space? 1 second, 2 seconds for that.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I think we all know that we have two types of vendors, and that is the street vendors and the market vendors. Yes, as you say it, that the market vendors have been a bit fortunate. Their businesses have a bit continued for those ones who could sleep in the markets. But for the street vendor, this is a woman who moves from Bweyogerere to Wandegea on foot daily to make sure that they sell their merchandise under high traffic and to the people who are moving, which of course, because of the ban on the movement, this has affected them very greatly. This meant that they had to go back to their homes and actually face a number of other challenges, of course, besides the failure to provide for their families. And remember, many of them are breadwinners to their families. So you find that many of them went back home. There's no livelihood. They cannot support their families. Secondly, others are now staying with their partners who are a bit abusive, and now that they are not economically empowered, it becomes a bigger and huger challenge once again. And again, you realize there's a lot of child care and home responsibilities, which have also added on a burden. Of course, the calls have been very many to us as an organization, but we are limited. You find that the funding that we have at the moment is already planned for other interventions. So you have to write back to the fund to make sure that what can we do for these women. But you realize that actually our hands are held, our hands are tied. And really, it has been a bit difficult. And our effort towards to the government to make sure that these street vendors, when they come back on the road, maybe small micro grants can be provided to them to make sure that their businesses resume, and then also to find them demarcated places where they can be able to operate and revive their livelihoods again.
Esther, thank you. Thank you so much, Esther, for your submission right there. We salute you. Of course, we'll be getting back to you in a few minutes. Let me bring it back to studio. It seems that information plays a critical role. You cannot compare a woman or a girl who's informed and has this information vis-a-vis a woman and a girl who doesn't have information. So the lack of information, and I think in your scenario as UNIPA, I think I'll start with you. I was looking at statistics and they're saying that, and of course this is coming from avert.org, one of the critical institutions right here in Uganda that of course I think you partner with and works with people living with HIV and AIDS in the country. And they say that the lack of sexual education is telling. Now, they gave us statistics of 2014 that they said that only 38.5 young women and men aged between 15 and 24, which I think is your age group, could correctively identify ways of preventing sexual transmission, have information about safeguarding themselves from SGBV. And so in this time, I can imagine it was worse. So how did you coin that and go around such a reality for you?
Well, it's like you mentioned, it is actually a very harsh reality because, well, information is power and a lot of people do not have information, and for us that is where you find stigma and discrimination. That is where it stems from, because people do not understand HIV, people do not understand the circumstances, so they try to make their own understanding or they formulate their own understanding of things, and you find that sometimes their own personal understanding is of course based on religion, is based on socialization, is based on how a person was raised, and many times it again continues to drive the HIV-related stigma and discrimination. So what we have been able to do is that we have launched a digital campaign, because of course with the limitations in our movement, we have been able to launch a digital campaign across any platform that shares information. So on TV, on radio, the community, you know, megaphones, on social media, on community radios, in community clubs, just anywhere at the markets. We have developed posters, and this has not just been developing information, but the information that is targeted. Much of our information has been targeting young people to deal with mental health challenges. How do women deal with issues of SGBV? You know, we raised the issue about the men because there are a lot of men who are struggling with having to stay at home for 24 hours after 24 hours after 24 hours. Because many of them are, you know, busybodies. You wake up, you go, you come back. And even for women, you know, she wakes up in the morning, she's looking at this man, he's seated here the whole day, he just eats and sleeps, and she's just looking at him like, you know, what's your plan? So there has been a lot of pressure that has come, of course, from both teams. But what we have tried to do is that we need to communicate to people in a language that they understand. And the different platforms, as I mentioned, part of it is also the peer-to-peer support. So you talk to people who also talk to people. And that is why you see, even within the HIV fraternity, you will find that there is the women's fraternity, there is the young people's fraternity, there is the adolescent girls and young women's fraternity, because as much as we are having the same challenges as a network, different challenges then become specific to the different groups of people that we work with. So we've tried to diversify our communication, but also trying to challenge stigma and discrimination. One of the things that we have struggled with now is that you go to deliver medication to a peer, and their neighbors see that maybe this is a car of UNIPA or Baylor, and they're like, oh, so those are the HIV people. These are the people they're delivering medication to. So everyone starts pointing, everyone starts, you know, trying to say, well, that is the family. And then they start asking, so who in that family is sick? Maybe the whole family is sick, you know, and, you know, they start speculating. And so some people have decided to, no, I don't need it. Like, if it's done, I'll find a way of getting it, but don't deliver it to my home. Then we have had issues of drug literacy, where, yes, the drugs are being delivered, but some people have gotten the wrong drugs. So unless a person is aware of what drug they are supposed to take and how they are supposed to take it, and also has that kind of additional keen interest to keep on reading and ensuring that they have the right drug, they're having challenges. And then there is myths and misconceptions. When COVID had just come, there is an art medication called Alluvia, and people were saying, well, if you take Alluvia, then you become coronavirus resistant. Like, you will not get any coronavirus. So you find those who have it want to take it, those who don't have it now want to take it, other people want to sell it. So the information has been reaching different people with different means in their spaces, in the languages that they understand. That is where we have even the app, because there are some people who don't like human interaction, but if they can talk on their phone, then they can also continue getting information through their phone.
You know, before I get to Susan, I'm keen for you to just help us understand and paint a picture for us, and just make some of these numbers make sense for us. Okay. Still, according to the same group, they're saying that as of 2018, an estimated HIV prevalence among adults between 15 and 49 stood at 5.7. Now, they move on to say that women are disproportionately affected. They're the most vulnerable. Of course, with their rate standing at 8.8% of adult women living with HIV and AIDS compared to that of men, which is pretty much half of that, 4.3%. So why are women more vulnerable? I can imagine now the situation is getting worse with the COVID-19. Why is the situation not favoring us, so to speak?
Well, I know my colleagues also have some few thoughts on the matter, but for me, I would like to start by saying, well, I think it started with how the whole prevalence of HIV started. Right. You know, many of the women are not in position to even negotiate for safe sex. For us women, even for a woman to initiate condom use to a man is seen as a very big abomination. So if you, very many women are not in position to even initiate condom use, very many women are not in position to negotiate for you know, safe sex, but also because of the economic kind of situation that drives women into the different kind of activities and risky behaviors that expose them to HIV and sex and and AIDS. So you find that women are much more disproportionately, of course, affected. One, because of the, of course, the economic society that we're living in. Two, we were talking about the issue of information. Not until a while ago in Uganda, many girls were not allowed to go to school. Many girls were not allowed to go to the formal settings. So you only had to hear about information from your aunties and your uncles. And if that is what they know, then that is what they know. Then, of course, there have been issues of where many men don't like to test. Not that it is an issue that we don't know their results, but many men will not take their results. Many, we did a survey recently, and it was amongst couples, like youth couples. And these were people who were aged 23 to 27. And from that survey that we did, we had around 65% of the men saying, I know my status from my partner's status. So if my partner is negative, it means we're good to go. So me, I'm not that. So it is a number of reasons, of course, the GBV that exposes the women to violence, but also the fact that as a country, we do not have the rules that protect women from exploitation. Right. We do not have minimum wage, you know, rules that ensure that women get equal opportunities in funding. We do not have, you know, the strict rules against, you know, defilement and all of these other cases of violence. We do not have the legal structures. You know, we're talking about structures and why they're important. If a young girl is raped, for instance, if Olga experiences rape, she's supposed to go as she has been raped, to go to the police station to file her case. Because if Olga then goes and removes her clothes and washes her body, then her case becomes null and void. So the system is really not supportive of the women and girls, and you find that many times, instead of supporting them, it then exposes them to HIV and other risky business. Right. But I'm sure my colleagues also have something.
Right. Thank you so much for your submission. I think we can switch gears and talk about our beautiful women and girls who are living with disability. And of course, in this same group, of course, UBOS is here to give us clear statistics of how many women and girls who are living with disability are actually HIV and AIDS positive. You can agree with me on that one. So I think over to you, Susan. You know, still again on statistics, it's just, you know, when you look at statistics, that's when it makes sense. And so I was looking at some of the numbers, and they're saying that out of the 45 million plus population that we have in Uganda, about 12.4% are people living with some form of disability, including severe disability. So Susan, to you, I'd like you to just break it down for us with regards to our beautiful women. Let's go down to that and zero in on the women and girls. Them that are disadvantaged in a double kind of scope. Number one, on grounds of them being women, so there's gender-based violence, and on grounds of stigmatization because they have some form of disability. So paint to us a picture on their current reality right now. Of course, Esther pointed out to another group of women we see on the streets, street vendors. Some of them actually have some form of disability. Now their livelihoods have been affected. So Susan, just paint a picture for us and let us in on, you can also give us an example on how you were able to just, you know, move in and save the situation for the few that you could.
explaining the issue of the women in the markets. As you are aware, most of our women work in the informal sector. Some are in the markets, others have been working in salons, others have been washing clothes for other people, and they've been getting that daily income. However, when the lockdown came in, these women got stranded. They are in their homes, they don't have food, they are really struggling to make ends meet. And we are seeing GBV cases on an increase just because of that. And in the end, these women are now depending on other fellow women. Remember, they have children. They are children with disabilities, but at the same time, they have HIV/AIDS. And they have really failed to access their ARVs. And as you know, they stopped the public transport. It is really hard. For example, when it comes to women with epilepsy, they need to get that medication, but they cannot move. Another example I could give is this issue of floods in Kasese. I can't imagine what is taking place to a woman with a disability in that area. Just imagine when it comes to relocation, a woman with a disability cannot move. So they need to get letters from RDCs. Some of them, they even don't know where that RDC's office is. They don't have that information. It is really a hard situation. Most of these women have been using border borders as their means of transport. But as you know, all that was stopped. So it is really a big challenge. They cannot get that transport.
Right.
So how can we work on that issue? What we have found out, this district task force, they've not involved persons with disabilities as members. And in the end, these people have been left out. For example, if I could talk about the education, you know, the schools were closed, so they brought in this issue of distributing materials. To tell you the truth, children with disabilities have not accessed these materials. We are seeing lessons taking place on different TV stations. These deaf children are not benefiting. The materials are not accessible. When it comes to the blind children, they can't read those materials, and it is really a total mess. These children have really been left out.
Right.
Sometimes we've seen people sending information on WhatsApp. As you're all aware, not all women with disabilities have these smartphones. They even don't know what WhatsApp means. The schools send information on links, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. Really, they are not benefiting.
All right.
Another issue is the challenge of these women staying at home. The domestic violence. Remember, these women, they are disabled, they are women, they don't have food, so they end up being abused in their homes. They even don't know what to do. Sometimes as they are distributing food, they make announcements on the radios, but these people don't get information, so they end up missing all these.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
they end up missing all this information.
Yeah. Maybe, Susan, you can let me in on, with that reality now, what do you think could be the solution then? Do you think it's just a done deal, all, so to speak, being lost? Or you hope and believe that government will wake up to the reality that they cannot leave behind people living with disability? Because like you're saying, the district task force pretty much is forgetting about this group of people in our society, in our districts. So what could be the solution, Susan?
What we need from the government is to make sure that those district task force at the national level and at the district level, at least we have representatives of persons with disabilities. Because these people, they know where these people are. They know, I think they would give advice to the task committee on what they are supposed to do. When it comes to materials, they can tell them on what to do so that these people are not left out. So I think we need to have representatives on those district task force. Because we have numbers. When they were giving out food, if they had included representatives of persons with disabilities, we are sure those people would have benefited. Because their councillors know where those people are, they know the right numbers, and that would be easy for them.
Okay. All right.
And I hope even those different other categories, like persons living with HIV, they also need someone to be represented on those district task force.
Right.
I think that would help to get access to services during this lockdown.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that submission. I think that's a practical solution, so to speak. It's time government woke up to the realization that we have a whopping 4.5 million people in Uganda living with some form of disability. If we look at it from a political scope, we're counting down to 2021. Those are votes. All right, Lillian, over to you.
But
with
before,
regards.
I think I wanted to add to what
please.
Susan is saying. I think the reality is really should be getting people to be emotional. Like I said earlier on, that if we have a structure of people living with disability, right from the national level to the lower levels, how come, even when we were thinking about interventions like provision of food, that would have been one of the structures through which food would have been, distributed, so that we know that people living with disability, people living with HIV, young people will get through their own structure and mechanism.
Right.
So that is one. But I think also what Susan is saying, and what I want our viewers to really take seriously, is how a response that we are running is not gendered. Because if you have a gendered response, you have to look at all these issues, put them together, and come up with a program that addresses everybody's needs. I just want to give you an example from my experience as people living with HIV.
Right.
That in the lobbying and mobilization, we have been able to get one partner who is going to provide food for the vulnerable of the vulnerable.
Okay.
We have about 1.2 million people who are on treatment, and majority of those are in dire need of support in this current situation. But we have reached an extent of where we've been only able to get support for about 2,400. So you can imagine the trouble that it is taking us to come from 1.2 people to 2,400.
Yeah.
And the impact it has on our structure, to the extent that COVID is not going to leave us the same. That the question will be, how did you select the 2,400 and leave out the rest? And yet we are all in dire need.
Right.
But also what it has brought to our attention is that many times we ignore things that are critical to our people. And that is what Susan is talking about. Because one of the things, for example, we are asking, in order to be sure that we are dealing with the real people, we are asking people at the grassroots, get us the registration numbers of the people that you're giving us. We are already now, we are the people who are advocating for confidentiality.
Right.
But now, COVID-19 is now making us, ignore that as if it is not an issue. But secondly, what we are getting is that we are forgetting that not everybody knows how to read, knows how to write. And therefore, when you're asking somebody to give you their number, registration number that they use when they go to the facility, you're actually asking them that if you cannot read, go to your neighbor who knows how to read so that they are able to read for you. And therefore, we are breaching the confidentiality. We are making people look completely more vulnerable than we found them.
Right.
So I think one of the things would be probably we need to look at the leadership that we are having at these different levels. That probably, and as Susan says, if we had people who are vulnerable, and the president was very clear, because among the groups that he listed the groups that are vulnerable to COVID-19.
Right.
And therefore, if you have groups that are vulnerable, there's no way you can come up with a response, with a program, with a strategy, where they are not involved, where they are not meaningfully engaging and inputting. And therefore, it is common knowledge that people that were mentioned should be at the task forces to give guidance. And because also our president has guided us well that if you want to fight an enemy, you must make sure that the enemy is closer within reach.
Right.
And therefore, if we are serving the vulnerable groups, where are they in these platforms, in these leadership roles, so that we know that they are informing policy, programs, decisions, and even where resources are located.
All right.
Because where I live, for example, on a daily basis, I get over 40 calls. When you go on our platform for people living with HIV, there's no day that ends when we don't have an issue that we need to deal with. You get?
Right.
But we are dealing with this ourselves. There are resources, you know, like you listen and hear, we are getting supplementary
But you don't
budgets,
see where this money is going. Exactly.
And we continue in the same situation where we were.
All right. We'll be getting into that, and especially looking at the monies that government has been able to get to respond to COVID-19 and break that down and see, are we seeing some money going into the young people living with HIV and AIDS? Are we seeing some money being, going to people living with disability? Are we seeing that money help your institution to help these women, pretty much access the services they need during this time? They're vulnerable. We know that their immunity is compromise, so they are at high risk during these times. But thank you so much for your submission. We have to take a short commercial break, but don't go anywhere. The second hour of this conversation will be interesting because we'll be now opening up the lines to you for you to be able to directly of course ask your questions or comments, and also float your suggestions to our panelists right here, and they'll be able to respond to you real time. We're also heavy on hashtag women against COVID-19 across all the social media platforms. NTV Uganda is also streaming live, so you can share, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. There are institutions right here in studio, and of course some of them joining me virtually, that are at the forefront of helping vulnerable women and girls in our society. So stay tuned, allow us to pay our bills. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our conversation this afternoon. Many thanks. We do salute you for joining in. I'd like to just shout you out on social media before we open the lines and before we get into your questions right here on social media. I have many of you online. Jamed, you're saying thank you so much, NTV, for spearheading such pertinent conversations. Thank you so much. We salute you. I also do have Amina Batega. You're saying following from Namutumba, yes, and indeed no representative at district task force. She agrees, of course, with our deliberations right here in studio. I also have Hakim Kimyoji. You're saying thank you so much. All right, thank you so much, Hakim. Rachel Ikilai, you're on. You're saying thank you, Lillian. Yeah, Lillian, this is for you, and Daphne, and also for Susan. And I think you're saying that for bringing to light the issues affecting us, people living with HIV and AIDS, and also people living with different disabilities. All COVID-19 programs should be inclusive. Of course, she says that we need food. We need adequate support to mitigate stigma and strengthen adherence support. Many thanks, Rachel, for your submission on social media. Of course, keep those going. We are heavy on hashtag COVID-19, women against COVID-19 across all the social media platforms. Just in case you want to step out, we're live on NTV Uganda as well across all the social media platforms. So loop in and be part of the conversation. I think with this line, and of course with the second phase, my panelists, I'll ask for your permission. Can we open the lines?
Sure.
All right, beautiful. So we are opening the lines in this hour, and of course, reading out the number to you. You can call us in live on air, and the number is 0414563462. Again, 0414563462. The number will be displayed. Yes, it's actually right there on your screen. So take advantage in case you have a query, a question, a comment, suggestion. Feel free to call in. We'll be taking in your calls. Also on social media, like I said, we'll be looking at your questions. But before we get into that, Lillian, we closed with you, but I want to start the ball with you because you have a broader perspective, the Eastern African region. And of course, on this conversation, I want to throw in the question of how best is government and the different sector players doing with regards to ensuring that, number one, we talked of information, empowering our women and girls in terms of information, but also providing for them different services and products that help them live a healthy, safer life, so to speak. I'm talking about condoms. Let's just drop it because you're talking about women and girls and HIV and AIDS. And so how do you think we're faring on? And the access to the same during the COVID-19 situation, paint a picture. How was it now that we're having an ease down, an ease of lockdown?
So I think we can be better. And I want to keep using that because we know that as a country, really the response towards COVID-19 has been applaudable. But I want to say that we can be better. And the word I just want to use and recommend that everybody uses and actions is integration. That in this 21st century, in 2020, we cannot continue providing services as if they are parallel. We need to integrate services. For example, we know that people are locked up in their homes. We know that people cannot get public transport to go to facilities. We know that people cannot even go to pharmacies, especially young people who get their family planning services from private facilities. And therefore the call should be, let's have an integrated approach to service delivery. That, for example, if the government has come up with a policy or a mechanism of distributing materials for reading for our children, they also know that these children are having relationships.
Right.
So we cannot hide our heads anymore. We need to find a way of how, for example, we are going to have sexual reproductive health services, including the condoms that you're talking about, delivered at the lower level. If we are talking about the LOC system, let's have these services there so that as we prevent COVID-19, we are preventing unwanted pregnancies, we are preventing people from getting HIV, which is also another epidemic, so that we are dealing with an individual, looking at them from a comprehensive approach.
Right.
But secondly, that we get a package that does not only look at a group of people, but looks at people in their diversity. That, for instance, you hear the message that we have, for example, is to say, our sisters, avoid those men. We are talking about the truck drivers. And here we are talking about, we know that sex work is real in this country. We know that we have sex workers. We know that that is their work. That's where they have been earning a living, a livelihood. And here we are saying, don't approach truck drivers. But we are not telling them what to do. We are not giving them a service that helps them deal with their immediate needs.
Actually, on that one, you know, reading through and this one, of course, as we link up to Betty, she will come after you, and then we'll come back to studio to just break this down. But before we go to Betty, there's one confession that was made by a female sex worker in Malaba, yes, the border region. And she said, you could be in a situation, a bad situation, and you are sick and on medication. At the same time, you may not have anything to eat. This is the reality of COVID-19. You look for a man who can help you. then that man will give you conditions. If you're going to have sex with him with a condom, he will give you 2,000 Uganda shillings or less. Then he says that if it is without a condom, hear this, he will give you 20,000 Uganda shillings or more. Now, because you can't help yourself, you have your reality to deal with, children to feed, you have no income, there's no way you can leave the 20K and go for 2,000 or less.
Exactly. So that is the reality, that when you are talking about public health, when you talk about dealing with a public good, if you talk about dealing with epidemics, you have to put into consideration the immediate needs of people. That for that sex worker, her immediate need is food, fending for her family.
Right.
So COVID-19 is a long term that after all, she's hearing that nobody has died. But if she doesn't deal with her immediate, probably she's going to die of hunger.
Right.
So,
and actually for her, she's weighing the situation. Do I die of hunger or do I die of COVID-19? Because you're telling them to also stay away from the truck drivers, who some are still willing to...
Yeah.
So that's why we need to put a lens of the people that are affected and impacted.
Right.
So if you talk about vulnerable people, there's no way you can go away without talking about sex workers, because for them, their work was truck drivers, selling sex, and now they are in a situation where that is no more. So any gendered response should have looked at how do we make sure that even when we are going to give information to these people, we have provided so that they have what to take. It should be a give and take. That you cannot say don't without helping people to know how they cannot, they can be supported to move on. And as of now, it is the sex work movement, for example, that is struggling on their own to make sure that they are able to mobilize from within to get food to give to their colleagues and their peers, that they are the ones reaching out to the task forces at the district level, begging, please give our people food, when it should have been, known that if we must deal with sex workers not reaching the truck drivers, we must provide for them. So I guess for me, the point still goes back to, we must have people on the tables where decisions are being made, where discussions are happening, to inform the decisions that they make.
All right, thank you so much, Lillian, for that, of course, submission. Of course, broadening our lens that customers of sex workers and not just truck drivers, but we know these things, right? All right, let me link to Betty Achana. She is, of course, a representative of the National Union of Women with Disabilities, works very closely with our very own right here in studio, Ms. Susan Achiro, coming from the same institution. Betty, many thanks for making time and joining us virtually this afternoon. Good afternoon. Do let me know if you can hear me.
Good afternoon. I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, thank you so much. Of course, my team will make sure that you get this. There's a video that I want us to play of a young man who tried to look at what could be the ultimate solution for his situation during this COVID-19 times. And for him, he was smart enough pre-COVID-19 and started saving with NSSF. Unfortunately, now that he needs his savings, he's been up and down, being thrown left, right, center. Still to date hasn't accessed even a coin of his savings. Let's take a watch. My team will ensure that you get a loop of the same. Let's take a watch and come back with your response, Betty.
NSSF savings gathered over 5 years.
This is the money that now can sustain me for the rest of my life, for livelihood and maybe seeking further treatment.
According to documents he provides, he lost his job due to lymphoma that left him incapacitated. Kalema filed an application for his savings and attached his medical reports. He said that NSSF subjected him to an examination that, according to the fund, showed his illness is correctable and that his condition was not permanent. Section 22 of the NSSF Act stipulates that a member entitled to invalidity benefit has to have a permanent total incapacity or partial incapacity that is permanent in nature. I asked Andrew Wabwezi, an advocate, what this means.
If it's going to be the situation for the rest of his life, then he's entitled to get his savings. Now, the other part is where, for example, somebody gets an accident, he gets surgery, but then after it all, he can walk, he can talk, but maybe he can't sit for an hour. He has to sleep or lie down intermittently, and this is going to be the situation permanently or for the rest of his life. Then he qualifies.
Kalema disagrees with the fund over its doctor's report that declared him ineligible.
What do we benefit from lying to you?
How do I confirm that what you are telling me is exactly what came from the doctor if you don't want me to look at the results?
That's not right. I don't think they're basing it on any law. He's entitled to have a copy of that report. I also heard that he has been given an option of going to another medical personnel. That's okay to do to find out whether these people have the same opinion. However, it's not right for NSSF to say that when that is done and the report is the same, then this man has no recourse anywhere. I think the managing director was saying that that is the end of it and he can't appeal anywhere. NSSF is not court and can't take the place of court.
It is not that whenever you get a problem, you go and draw cash from NSSF. No. The intention is the social security.
In an email, NSSF has told NTV that between July 2019 and 5th of May this year, they have paid 2,772 invalidity benefits worth 34 billion shillings.
I will not hesitate going to court.
When Kalema's story first aired on Monday, it attracted reaction from many who felt that he and many Ugandans in this situation should access their NSSF savings. But until the 1997 law is amended, many will have to bear the weight. Edward Mhumza, NTV.
Quite unfortunate right there, of course, subject to a lot of discussion. But Betty, being at the forefront of fighting for people living with disability and ensuring that they have access to a decent livelihood, what do you make of this story and what could be your possible contribution to the same, so to speak?
Hello? Hello?
Betty, can you hear me?
Hello?
All right, I think we're losing Betty, but in studio we do
Hello?
have Susan.
Hello?
All right. Betty, can you hear me? All right.
Yes, can I just come in?
Okay. Were you able to listen to the story?
Yes, my network is not very clear, but yes, I had partially the story. I have not watched it, but even before then, I had heard the story. It is very unfortunate and it is very painful. Now, first, people need to understand what disability is. What is the definition of disability? And who defines disability? So for NSSF to toss the gentleman around, I do not want to blame it directly on their policies, but on the knowledge. Many people do not understand the difficulties, the limitations, the value, and the weight of vulnerability. So my take is that we need to, as individuals and as communities, as stakeholders, we need to endeavor to understand persons with disabilities within our reach. It's only then that we can appreciate where they quickly need help, where they quickly need a response, and where they quickly need to be guided. It was very unfortunate for NSSF to do that, and I still continue to say it's very unfortunate and sad, and they need to rethink the action, because for a fact, this person needs their benefit. Not by the mere fact that, sorry, I'm getting a lot of echo and I don't, hello?
Hear me now?
Hello?
All right, I think we'll be getting to Betty in a few as my technical team sorts out the echo in her earpiece. But getting back to studio, I think I'll throw this to Susan. As Nuwodu, for that person who's watching and following through the conversation and wondering where does the mandate of Nuwodu and how far does the mandate of Nuwodu stretch to? Is this one of the cases that Nuwodu looks at and they're like, yeah, that one we can take up on? The livelihoods of people living with disability, is that an area that you stretch to or look into?
Mm-hmm. We, as in Nuwodu, we work with other DPOs. Those are the disabled persons organizations. And as we do our work, I think we have a national organizations of persons with disabilities in Uganda. Mm-hmm. I think they can take up such a case.
Okay.
And I know they've been watching that story. I think they will take it up. Okay. And what I know, he's not alone. So many things like that are happening in the society.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Betty, for that.
And I still think that he has a right to get his money.
Right. Right. Okay, Daphne, you wanted to chip in?
Maybe if I could add something a little.
Yes.
On the issue of the doctor's report. Sincerely speaking, you cannot make a medical report on an individual, then you deny a person from getting the results. I think that is where NSSF has gone wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Daphne, you wanted to chip in on the same?
Yeah, I just wanted to say basically something around NSSF because, you know, when the MD was talking, he was talking about something around social security, to say when you have a problem, you don't just walk into NSSF and you pick your money. And then in my question, I'm thinking about a young person who is not in formal employment and who is not subject to NSSF. So how exactly do these government structures support such young people in such cases? Because it could be easy for people to walk into NSSF and argue for their money, but how about people who are in the informal sector?
Right.
There was a mention about the cabinet tabling the National Health Insurance Scheme. How far with that, and how do we have people who are not earning daily income actually benefiting from insurance? Because you realize that some of these issues could even be handled way before you go into NSSF, because if there is insurance in the country that is for me and you and for every person and not just for specific people whose contracts allow them to have insurance, then I think some of the issues even to do with social security could be handled way before they even escalated.
Right. Lillian, I want you to get in on the same, but on a regional scope. You know, we were looking at some of these issues and just looking at this and thinking, all right, we have this issue of NSSF, but specifically to Uganda, we know that the administration has been pretty much managed. NSSF administration has been pretty much managed over the years by the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, so to speak. And now the conversation of moving this administration from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development to the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah.
What will that mean?
So, from my perspective, the starting point would be when all this conversation is happening, where are the people, the savers?
Right.
Because if people are saving, they have the mandate, they should be given the first priority in discussing and contributing to the decision making. And in my opinion, it is not even where the NSSF is housed. But the question is it serving the purpose?
Right.
Because people save so that when you're in difficult situation, when you are unable, your savings help you.
Yes.
And in the case of Uganda, for example, where we know that our social sector is not strong enough, where up to today in my village where I live in Senge, in Wakiso, we have not even seen a drop of posho and beans 2 months down the road. That is where NSSF should be coming in to help people so that when they were able, they saved. And now that they are not able,
they need to access
it's coming in to help.
Right.
So I think, for me, the question is, who cares about us as Ugandans?
Okay.
Who cares about people?
All right, thank you.
That need to be cared for.
Thank you, Lillian.
Where is our parliament?
Right.
Okay, if Ugandan parliament is not working to help people in the country, where are our regional representatives? How are they appealing to their power above the country to cause for a meeting or a sitting
to quickly change some of these policies and acts, right?
So it is really unacceptable. The situation that we see, you know, like we've reached a level where everybody has given in, that you see things and nobody comes up to say, this is wrong.
Okay.
So I think we are taking people for a ride.
All right.
We are taking citizens of our countries for a ride. And I think some power has to come. And that's why for me I want to push for a movement. We need to build a movement that is going to stand up and say, we cannot continue seeing what we are seeing in the video. We cannot continue seeing women dying when they are on the roads going to deliver. We cannot continue registering gender-based violence issues.
Right.
And we take it as a normal. Is that what we call the new normal?
It shouldn't
I
be.
think we need to have a new normal that is going to say enough is enough. We deserve better as a people.
Okay.
We deserve better as savers of NSSF. And we don't need to continue because if the policies are there, yes, but the policies must be they are made by people, and therefore they can be revised.
Yes.
If Parliament can sit in a minute and make decisions that they make,
they can also revise the same.
So
All right, thank you so much.
It cannot be about them.
Right.
It should be about the people.
Exactly.
It should be about the 45 million people who are suffering right now.
Okay.
And it should be the women and girls, the children, the people with disability, the men out there who are, you know, like, who are in the homes.
Yes.
They are not able to provide for their families.
Right.
And
that is causing a lot of tension in
Tension
families, and of
and
course
gender-based
one of the
violence
drivers
and
of gender-based
everything.
violence. Thank you so much, Lillian, for that. I'd like to link directly to Kapchorwa, if I'm right. Kapchorwa, yes it is, and on standby is Miss Miriam Chekut.
The men out there
Miss Miriam Chekut.
who are in the homes, they are not able to provide for their families.
Right. And that is causing a lot of tension in families, and of course one of the drivers of gender-based violence. Thank you so much. Back in studio, but that has been sorted out. From Kapchorwa, Miriam Chekut, can you hear me? And on stand. Can you hear me, Miriam? All right, we'll be trying to connect to Miriam in a bit. She is the program manager of the National Association, beg your pardon, the National Association of Women Organizations in Uganda. She's all the way in Kapchorwa, and so we'll be linking to her to just get her views on the same, especially with regards to what Miss Lillian right here in studio is trying to drive at, a movement to make sure that some of these things don't continue as has been. We need to now forge for a new normal which is breaking social, economic barriers, social barriers as well, religious barriers as well, for different groups, women, girls, men as well. I'm seeing you on social media and men are complaining. But hey, Miriam, over to you if you can hear me now. What's your take on this current situation, especially for matters livelihood and the NSSF story that you've just listened into? I'm keen to hear your take on the same, because it's the same man. We're looking at drivers of domestic violence, and one of the drivers is that tension where the man or the woman who has been providing can no longer do the same. So something small, they get agitated. So your take on this one, Miriam, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mala. I think for me, the COVID-19 situation has been a test on our readiness, our commitment as a country to address the needs of the most vulnerable, especially the women, girls, young people. And it has really exposed the glaring gaps in social service delivery, matters concerning social protection, and that participation, ensuring that the most vulnerable communities participate in decision making and that their voices matter. I think for me, it's high time that government sits back and reflects on their ability, our ability as a country to support women, ensure that that the barriers, the social, economic, political barriers that have kept them in a state of deprivation for all these decades are addressed, and that they are nipped. Actually, for me, in the last 2 months, I've seen how non-committal our government is in supporting and uplifting women and girls. I have also seen the gaps in health service delivery, just for example's sake. I remember recently, about 3 weeks ago, I went to one of an RDC's office, queuing up to get a movement permit. While there, the lines were abnormally long, and I noticed there were some women who had sat in the lines for about four hours. So I got interested as an activist. I got interested, to find out why they were in the line, what exactly they needed from the RDC, because I felt I would intervene. So I realized that one of the women was from the hospital. Apparently, she had undergone a surgical procedure the day before, and all she needed was a permit to move on a border to her home, about 12 kilometers from town. And then I was like, really? This is still happening in this day and age? Isn't there a way the health sector can coordinate and ensure that this woman is supported to get a permit? It was so painful, really. It was painful, and I realized that we have a lot of work to do as women activists. I also realized that there's that lack of coordination among government institutions, and this is inflicting a lot of pain. It's causing a lot of pain among women and girls. And also the fact that during emergency situations, I think we shouldn't lose focus on the basics. And one of the key principles of response in emergencies is ensuring that the degree of suffering among the populace, among the citizens, especially the most vulnerable, is not worsened either by the emergency situation, in this case COVID-19, or any other conditions surrounding them. So that is really a general insight I would give into this. But also, before I conclude, the need to ensure that there is monitoring of interventions. I know that the president over the last couple of weeks has been giving guidance on how the COVID-19 situation can be dealt with, but I have not heard anything about how the task forces, either national or district, are being monitored to ensure that they deliver on their commitments. And that is a very big gap. I don't know whether it's deliberate or it is an issue of omission, but that's something that ought to be fixed so that citizens get what they deserve from Lovely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miriam Cheikut, Program Manager of the National Association of Women Organizations in Uganda. She was joining us via Zoom. She's actually in Kapchorwa as we speak. Many thanks. We salute you. Thank you for making time to join us on the conversation. Harsh realities, and something has to be done. I think on this last round we'll be throwing in solutions, and I'll start with you, Daphne. You know, the young people, now that you are the forefront for the young people, only that it's them that are living with HIV and AIDS, but of course you also are in touch with the others so they don't get infected, so to speak. Unemployment is a reality, our reality in Uganda. They were saying that out of the 10,000, 100, can I remember the figures right? Out of 100,000 graduates that we always have. For example, any 100,000 graduates that we have, this is statistics coming from UBOS, they say that only 10% get employment in the formal sector. There's a lot to want. Now, looking at the current statistics, courtesy of COVID-19, our economy is expected to grow at a slower rate than projected. Ministry of Finance had projected that we'll be having our economy on a, of course, a growing trajectory. We're talking about 6%, but now they're saying that it will be slower in the ranges of 5.2 to 5.7%. What does that mean? Points out to the informal sector. The informal sector, that if we look at least the young people that are employed, they're the high number. Most of them are employed in the informal sector. So in your reality, as you interact with the young people, what are they saying, and what do you think could be the quick solutions that government can jump on to ensure that post-COVID-19 we don't have a time bomb? Because if we have a big number of unemployed youth, that's a security time bomb right there.
Thank you. And it's very interesting. You know, I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and they were talking about the same thing. You know, the economy is stuck, the economy is not moving. But the economy is moving. It's just that everyone is doing the jobs that were originally done by women, that have always been done by women, but have never been acknowledged. Taking care of your family, taking care of your relatives, taking care of your community members. These are things that we have been doing as women all the time, and they have never been acknowledged. And the reason why now the economy is slowing down is because, you know, of all of these issues. But I'll not get into that because of, you know, different things. But in terms of what is the reality for the young people, I think what the young people have been able to demonstrate in this kind of COVID reality, as Lillian was mentioning earlier, is that they can handle their own business. They can get up and sit on the bike and they can go and support their peers. If there is an issue, young people can come together, they put their brains together in a think tank and they can talk their way through it. If anything, the youth structures, the district-based movements that UNIPA have had, have been able to support the network to a much greater length, much more than the staff who are based in Kampala can do. Because there, it's not just about doing the work, but it is actually ensuring that the well-being of that young person is incomplete. It's not about giving someone an education, it's not about giving them money, it's about ensuring that their mental health, their whole capacity as an individual is actually built. So one of the recommendations that I would have is, well, for Ministry of Health, there was a discussion where they had, of course, tried to downplay the peer educators model, and they're now trying to bring in the YAPS model, where young people are then, you know, at the forefront of service delivery. And I think this has to continue. This really needs to continue. The second thing, and this has been something that I've always been talking about, is that as a country, we really need to rethink our education system. We really need to think about the kind of education that we believe is important vis-a-vis what is the actual reality in the country. I can tell you for a fact that there are people like me who studied, who spent, you know, nights of prep in chemistry, physics,
burning the midnight oil.
Exactly. And according to UNEB, if I get an F9 in chemistry or in physics, I'm a failure. You know, I cannot graduate from a certain level of education. So we really need to rethink our education system to think about jobs and building skills that actually benefit people, building skills that people can actually build from. Because right now, I remember the first address of the president when they said essential workers. And then they were talking about vendors, they were talking about people at the washing bay, and all these people with big offices are just there like, oh, so I'm not an essential worker. It's not that you're not an essential worker, but the kind of work that you're doing does not directly contribute to the economy. So we really need to reinvest in that, and part of what we need to do is that we need to invest in the government structures, the district-based structures, the issues of accountability and also transparency, but also, you know, capacity building for us to be able to understand the processes that we are a part of.
Thank you so much, Daphne, for your submission. Of course, that's your closing one. Lillian, over to you. Then we'll give Ms. Susan ample time to close with us. Still looking at the, the conversation right now is stimulus packages. There's the ease of the lockdown. Our reality is here. Thank God we can now move. Thank God our women and girls, because they're girls who do work, can now move about and try to eke a living for their families. Now, with that and the reality that, well, government is trying as much as possible now, trying to bring down the policy rate from 9% to 8%. Yeah, and having a conversation to ensure that the stimulus packages, of course, access to loans at, affordable rates, so to speak. I want you to speak on that, and also vis-a-vis your mandate in the East African region, of course, with regards to trying directly help women living with HIV and AIDS, who are, we always say, thanks to institutions like yours, access to, ARVs, they're able to live a normal life, but now they have to eke a living. Speak to that.
Yeah,
you have 1 minute.
I think what we need is a safety net system that probably is from international, regional, national, and lower levels.
Right.
Because we have now learned that giving and giving and giving is not what is needed. I think our people now and our communities need some little resources, some little facilitation, capacity, so that they are able to do better what they are doing. For example, we need to put, as a country and as a region, they need to think around putting enough resources into agriculture. Because, for example, now we know that as a country, as Uganda, for example, we've been able to survive the 2 months when we've been in a lockdown, because agriculture and people who are farming and doing agriculture have been able to maintain us. And therefore what we need is to make sure that the government and development partners put resources there. And women, for example, who are working in informal sector, who are, women who have been sleeping in markets, as we've heard, the bottom line is that they don't have the capital anymore. And therefore we need to find a way, and there has to be a way of investing, like putting some resources so that they are able to get more capital to get back to where they were.
Okay.
But I think I want to end by saying that from where we are, because we have seen the small bits and pieces that people are doing, like, for example, women who have put up shelters for women who have experienced gender-based violence. We have worked as people living with HIV to put up, to support the toll-free line, where people can ask. But we need to see those, like innovations on scale. Okay. And we cannot continuously depend on our donors. And we thank our donors. We thank partners like UN Women, the Spotlight Initiative, but for how long are we going to go? So we need our country to come in, that if today our government, the task force, asked people to continuously donate as they are doing, with an aim of putting up a pool of resources that are going to be some kind of pool that where people can get resources to continuously get back into their businesses that they have been doing that are shutting down, I think that would be the way to go. Okay. But I think I want to conclusively end by saying that integration is a key. That we need to look at all this as a whole, that we are not looking at health alone, we are not looking at services alone, we are not looking at the economic situation, but we are seeing everything together, putting it together, and having the government institutions, like Olga said at the beginning, working together so that they are reinforcing each other and coming up with a program that looks at an individual as a whole and that serves the millions of people that are in this country.
Thank you so much, Lilian, for that conclusive submission. Susan, over to you. I'm giving you 2 minutes to, you'll be the last turn to conclude for us this conversation. I want you to speak to, on behalf of the 4.5 million Ugandans who are living with some form of disability, and also on their behalf to government and other partners who ought to now look at them differently and prioritize on them.
Thank you. I would like to request the government to try to always be flexible, especially when it comes to issues of persons with disabilities. They need to be sensitive. For example, we are talking about easing the lockdown, but how many persons with disabilities have private cars? Right. That is a question. So this means that persons with disabilities are still under lockdown. They've been using the borders, they've been using the taxis. So before those come back on the road, then they will continue being in the lockdown. Another issue I would like to talk about is these women with disabilities who have been working in the informal sector. They need a startup. As you all know, they've spent all the money, the little money they had, to feed their children, and as they come back into business, they need some hope.
Okay.
I wish we had the money in our hands. We would have tried to save the situation.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan, for your submission. Many thanks, many thanks. We hope for a better tomorrow for our women and girls. Before I wrap up, I'd like to just shout you out who has made time, who has made time to be part of us on our social media platforms. Just a few because you're too many. Forgive me for that. I do have Titus Godwin, also Ntale Brian Brayo, thank you so much. Linus Libent, thank you so much. Peter Manya, I also do have Habib Thi Bantu, Gonza Martin, many thanks, and so many more. Of course, make sure that you're also in touch. Yes, I'm talking to you, my panelists, them that are here with me in studio and virtually. Be in touch on social media. There's lots of questions, of course, that have been posed to you. If you can reach out, kindly please do so. All right. Another line of thanks is to our dear interpreter, Maureen Nambalirwa, for making sure that this conversation is seamless as possible. Of course, assisting Susan Achiro, the social worker from National Union of Women with Disabilities of Uganda. Ladies, I salute you. Many thanks for making time. Also, we were joined by Miss Lilian Moreko. She is the ED of the International Community of Women living with disability, living with HIV, beg your pardon, in the Eastern African region. Thank you so much for making time. And also Olga Daphne Namukuza, Programs Manager at UNIPA, that's the Uganda Network of Young People Living with HIV and AIDS. Many thanks for your contribution to society and young people alike in Uganda. Also virtually, I was joined by Betty Achana, representative and also coming from the National Union of Women with Disabilities in Uganda. She was joining us all the way from Namugongo. Yes, of course, because of social distancing issues, she couldn't join us in studio. Also, I was joined by Esther Namboka, founder and executive director of Girls Forum International. Salute to you. Many thanks for the amazing things you're doing for our street vendors and our mamas on ground. Also, Miriam Cheikut, all the way from Kapchora. She is the programs manager of the National Association of Women Organizations in UG. Let's strive for a better tomorrow for women and girls. You do have a role to play. Let's wake up and do just that, all right? Hashtag, of course, Women Against COVID-19 continues on social media. Many thanks for being with us. I salute you. My name is Mala Kivila Odera, founder and CEO of Silmas Consult. Good evening.